The city was cold that evening and the streets were busy with people rushing home before the rain could fall. But near the corner of the train station sat an old woman with a small black bag beside her and a tired look in her eyes. Her name was Clara, and she had been sitting there for hours watching strangers walk past her without even a glance. She looked like someone forgotten by time, with silver hair falling over her face and hands that trembled, not from fear, but from years of hard work and hunger. Her coat was worn out and her shoes had holes, yet she sat tall with her back straight, as if she once belonged to a different world. As people passed by, some whispered to each other, thinking she was just another beggar asking for coins or food. But Clara did not beg for money that day. She only had a small piece of cardboard in front of her with 5 simple words written in shaky handwriting. "Can I play for food?" A young man with headphones noticed the sign and laughed quietly, to himself, telling his friend beside him that maybe the old lady wanted to play some children's song for a sandwich. They both laughed and kept walking, never noticing the calm confidence in her eyes. Another group of teenagers passed by and one of them stopped, looked at the sign and said out loud, "Play what, Grandma, the spoons?" The others burst into laughter and threw a few coins near her feet just to mock her. Clara smiled gently without anger and picked up the coins, placing them carefully in her pocket as if they were precious. Then she looked up at the cloudy sky and whispered to herself that music would speak louder than pride. From her bag, she pulled out a small electronic keyboard, the kind that runs on batteries, and she placed it carefully on her lap. People around her started to watch with curiosity, thinking it would be funny to hear what she could play. The first notes that came from the keyboard were soft and slow, like raindrops falling on glass. The sound floated through the cold air and made a few people turn their heads. Within seconds, the noise of the street seemed to fade as her fingers began to move faster, with surprising grace and power. Her hands did not shake anymore. They danced across the keys like they had been waiting years to come alive again. An old man nearby stopped walking and stared, his eyes wide open. He whispered to no one in particular that the melody sounded familiar. Another woman carrying groceries dropped her bag because she recognized the piece. It was Moonlight Sonata by Beethoven, played with emotion so deep it could make a heart cry. Soon a small crowd formed around Clara, people recording with their phones, others simply standing frozen, as if afraid to miss a single note. Her music was full of sadness, but also full of strength. Each chord spoke of loss and love, of hunger and hope. Every sound seemed to carry a story, a memory of something beautiful that once was. When she finished the first song, there was silence only, the sound of rain beginning to fall softly on the pavement. Then applause broke out loud and long, echoing through the station. People who had laughed before were now cheering, shouting, "Encore! Encore!" Clara smiled again, a little shyly, and nodded. She played another tune, this time faster and brighter. The keyboard was small, but under her touch it sounded grand, as if a full piano was hidden inside. Her fingers moved like lightning, yet her face stayed calm. Her eyes closed, lost in the music. A child tugged at her mother's sleeve and whispered, "She plays like the lady on TV," but the mother could not answer because she too felt tears running down her cheeks as the songs continued. More people gathered. Even the street guards stopped to listen. Someone offered her a sandwich, another person brought her a cup of hot coffee. Clara thanked them quietly between songs, always polite, always smiling. No one knew who she really was, but there was something royal in the way she held herself, something that made everyone feel small in her presence. A man wearing a suit stepped forward after her third piece and asked, "Where did you learn to play like that?" Clara looked at him for a long moment, her eyes distant, like they were looking back through many years. Then she said softly, "In another life." The man thought she was joking and laughed, but deep inside he felt something strange, like he should know her face from somewhere. Before anyone could ask more questions, the train arrived with a loud noise and the crowd began to move away. But a few people stayed behind, watching her pack up her small keyboard carefully, as if it were made of gold. She stood up slowly, her knees weak, but her spirit strong. As she walked away, someone whispered, "She should be on a stage, not on the street." No one knew that once upon a time she had been Clara disappeared into the evening rain, leaving behind the echo of her music and a group of strangers who would never forget the sound of an old woman playing. For food, the night grew darker as Clara walked through the narrow streets, her small keyboard held close to her chest like a piece of her heart. The rain had stopped, but the ground was still wet, shining under the yellow streetlights, and every step she took made a soft sound that echoed in the empty road. Her shoes were soaked, her hands were cold, yet her face looked peaceful, as if the music she had played had warmed her from the inside. She reached an old building with a broken sign that said, "Sunset Home for Women," and pushed open the rusty door. Inside, the smell of soup and medicine filled the air, and a nurse behind the counter looked up and smiled faintly, recognizing her. "You played again, didn't you, Clara?" the nurse said, shaking her head gently. "You need to rest." Clara smiled and nodded slowly, her voice quiet and tired. "Music keeps me alive." Maria. The nurse walked with her down the hallway, where old paintings hung on cracked walls, and the sound of a radio played softly. In the distance, the home was small and simple, with faded curtains and squeaky floors, but to Clara it was more than a shelter. It was the only place that had accepted her when no one else did. In her small room by the window sat a wooden chair, a tiny bed, and a single-framed photo of a man with kind eyes and a smile that could light up the darkest night. Clara touched the frame gently and whispered, "I played again today." Love, they listened this time. The man in the photo was Elliot Hartman, a name once known in music halls around the world because he was her husband and her duet partner in every performance they had ever done together. Years ago, Clara and Elliot were called the Golden Hands of classical music. They played in New York, in London and Paris, and every time they walked on stage, the crowd stood before the first note even began. But fame is a fragile thing, and so is love when surrounded by noise and jealousy. Clara still remembered that day like it was yesterday, the grand hall filled with light, the piano shining under the stage lamps, and her heart beating fast with excitement. She was ready to play when Elliot suddenly stopped midway through the concert, holding his chest, his face pale. The audience gasped as he collapsed beside the piano and the music stopped forever. He died that night, leaving Clara alone in a world that had lost its sound. After that, the newspapers wrote about her for weeks, some with sympathy, others with cruel headlines saying she would never play again without him. Sponsors withdrew their support and concert halls stopped calling because no one wanted to see a pianist without her famous partner. Clara tried to teach music to children, but her heart wasn't the same. And soon she sold everything she had just to survive. When she could not pay rent anymore, she moved into the Sunset Home, where no one cared about her past, only about her quiet smile and gentle songs. But something inside her still burned like a small flame refusing to die. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard music waiting to be played again, and tonight, for the first time in years, she had felt that flame rise when people on the street listened, truly listened. As she sat by the window, looking at the rain returning in light drops, she whispered to herself, "Maybe tomorrow I will go back there. Maybe music is not finished with me yet." At that same moment across the city, a young man named Ryan Parker was watching a video on his phone. He had recorded it earlier that day at the station when the old woman played that magical song. The video was blurry because his hands were shaking from excitement, but the sound was perfect, every note clear and full of life. He uploaded it online, with the caption, "Homeless woman plays piano better than any star I have heard." Within hours, the video began to spread across the internet, people commenting that she must be trained, that no street performer could play like that. Musicians reacted, with surprise, some saying they felt chills just hearing her music. One person even commented that her hands looked like those of Clara Hartman, the legendary pianist who disappeared years ago after her husband's death. Ryan read that comment and froze, searching her name online and seeing old pictures that looked almost the same, only younger and brighter. Could it be the same woman? The next morning, news reporters began searching for her. People posted clips trying to find where she lived, but Clara had no idea any of this was happening. She woke up early, brushed, her hair tied it neatly behind her head, and packed her keyboard again. Maria, the nurse, watched her from the doorway and asked, "Going to play again?" Clara smiled and said softly, "Yes. I think people still need music even if they do not know it yet." She walked out of the home with quiet confidence, her steps light like someone half her age. The sky was clear now, the streets full of morning light, and somewhere in the crowd a young man named Ryan was already waiting near the same corner, hoping to see her again. As she sat down at her usual spot and placed the small cardboard sign in front of her, the city began to slow down around her as if the world was holding its breath. And when her fingers touched the keys again, the first note floated, in the air, beautiful and fragile, like the start of a miracle that no one could stop. The sun rose over the city, and the streets filled with noise, cars, honking people, rushing trains passing. But in one small corner near the station, there was a sound, different from all others. It was the sound of Clara's small keyboard singing through the air, soft and gentle, yet strong enough to make strangers stop in their tracks. Her fingers moved with quiet power, her silver hair glowing under the morning light and her eyes half closed as if she was talking to the music itself. Ryan stood at the edge of the crowd, his phone in his hand, recording every moment, his heart racing because he knew he was witnessing something rare, something almost magical. He had spent all night watching comments on his video, reading messages from people around the world, asking who this woman was and where she came from. Some said she was a teacher, others said she was an angel in disguise, but one comment had caught his attention more than any other one that said, "That is Clara Hartman. I would know those hands anywhere." Now standing there, Ryan could not stop wondering if it was really true, if this quiet woman in an old coat and worn shoes was once the queen of concert halls, the legend that disappeared years ago. He waited until she finished her song, and the crowd clapped again, louder this time, people throwing coins and even bills into her small box, some offering food and warm drinks. Clara thanked them all with a smile, her voice soft and kind, but her eyes distant, as if her thoughts were somewhere far away. Ryan stepped forward, his voice shaking. "Ma'am, excuse me, can I talk to you for a moment?" She looked up at him, curious, and nodded slowly. "I posted your video online last night," he said nervously. "It went everywhere. People are talking about you. Everyone wants to know who you are." Clara tilted her head, her brow furrowed as if she didn't quite understand online. She repeated softly, "I don't know what that means." Ryan laughed a little, trying to explain that millions of people had seen her playing, that her music had touched hearts across the world, that she had become famous again, overnight. For a long moment, Clara said nothing, her fingers resting gently on the keys, her eyes glistening as she whispered, "Famous again," like it was a word she hadn't spoken in years. Then she smiled faintly. "Child, I was never famous. I only played because music was my prayer." But before Ryan could reply, a voice behind him shouted, "That's her. It's really her." Two older women came running through the crowd, holding their phones, showing old photos of concerts, of newspaper covers of a young Clara Hartman sitting beside a grand piano, smiling with her husband. The people around gasped, whispering to each other and pointing their cameras toward her, calling her name over and over. Clara looked around, confused, frightened, even by the sudden noise and flashes. But then she saw one picture, on a screen, her and Elliot sitting side by side, and she froze, her hand trembling. The memories came rushing back. The lights, the applause, the music, the night she lost him. Everything she had buried deep in her heart now rising again like a storm. She could not stop. Her knees weakened, but she stayed standing, her voice barely a whisper. That was a long time ago. Ryan stepped in front of her, trying to calm the crowd, telling people to give her space, but it was too late. Reporters had already arrived, their cameras clicking, their microphones pushing forward, asking questions like arrows. "Where have you been all these years, Clara? Why did you disappear after your husband died? How does it feel to be famous again?" Clara said nothing, her eyes distant, until one question made her stop. "Do you plan to play on stage again?" For a second the world seemed to pause, her gaze lifting toward the gray sky, her lips trembling. Then she said softly, "If the world still wants music, maybe I will." That night, every news channel spoke of her story. The lost legend found again, the woman who played for food but carried the soul of a master. Clips of her old concerts played side by side with the video from the train station, showing her wrinkled hands moving, With the same grace she once had, people across the world shared her music, calling her a miracle of time, a reminder that true talent never dies at the Sunset Home. Maria. The nurse watched the news, tears in her eyes, whispering to herself, "She deserves this more than anyone." The next morning, letters and flowers started arriving for Clara at the home, fans from different countries, thanking her for bringing beauty back into their lives. Even old students she had once taught sent messages begging her to return to the piano halls. They remembered her gentle voice, her soft patience, her magic touch. Ryan visited her again that afternoon, bringing a small tablet to show her the messages. Clara listened quietly, smiling as videos played of people trying to copy her music. Some children playing her songs on small pianos, others singing her melodies. When it ended, she looked at Ryan and said, "I did not know I still mattered." Ryan answered, "You never stopped mattering. The world just forgot for a while." She touched his hand gently and whispered, "Then maybe it is time to remind them what music really means." That evening, Clara opened her old case under the bed, and inside lay a piece of yellow paper with her husband's handwriting, a song he wrote for her but never got to finish. She sat by the window, the sunset painting her face in gold, and began to hum the tune softly, promising to finish it. Not for fame, not for money, but for love and memory. Outside, the city lights began to glow, and the world waited unknowingly for the return of its forgotten queen of music. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the dusty window of the Sunset Home, and Clara woke up to the sound of footsteps outside her door. People talking excitedly, and the phone ringing nonstop. Maria, the nurse, rushed in with wide eyes, holding a letter in her hand, her voice trembling with joy. "Clara, you will not believe this. They want you to perform again." Clara sat up slowly, her silver hair shining in the light, her hands resting on the blanket as she whispered softly, "Perform again," where Maria smiled so wide it almost looked like she would cry. "At the Grand Symphony Hall, the same place you played your last concert 20 years ago. They are holding a tribute night for music legends, and they want you to be the main guest." For a long time, Clara said nothing. She stared out of the window at the small garden outside where birds hopped between branches, her face calm, but her eyes full of deep thoughts. Finally, she said quietly, "That stage holds too many memories. Maria, too many ghosts." But Maria knelt beside her bed and took her hands gently. "Those ghosts are waiting for you to set them free." That afternoon, reporters filled the front gate of the Sunset Home, cameras flashing, questions flying everywhere, asking what song she would play, what she felt about returning after so many years. Clara answered none of them. She only smiled politely and whispered, "Let the music speak when the time comes." Inside her room, she unpacked her old sheet music, the pages yellow and soft from age, and on top lay the unfinished song her husband Elliot had written the last night before he died. Across the top of the paper was written in his handwriting, "For Clara, the melody of forever." Her fingers traced the faded ink, and her heart began to ache with both love and loss. She remembered his voice, his laughter, his gentle way of correcting her mistakes during practice. Tears filled her eyes, but she wiped them away, saying softly, "I will finish this for you, Elliot. I promise." Ryan visited later that evening, bringing her a new keyboard, and said he would help her practice. He was not a pianist, but he loved music and admired her courage. Every day after that, he came to the Sunset Home and sat beside her, listening carefully as she played, correcting tiny mistakes, reading the notes she could no longer see clearly. The other women at the home gathered around the doorway every evening to listen, some crying, some smiling, remembering the music of their own youth. Even the staff stopped working for a few minutes each night just to hear her fingers dance again. Days turned into weeks, and the night of the concert grew closer. The city buzzed with excitement. Newspapers printed her old photos, and posters appeared everywhere, showing her smiling face with the words, "The Return of Clara Hartman." People from different countries booked tickets, saying they could not miss the chance to see a legend reborn. The hall was sold out within hours. The night before the concert, Clara could not sleep. She sat by the window watching the moon and holding Elliot's photo close to her heart. her lips whispering his name again and again. Tomorrow I will play our song My Love tomorrow. The world will remember you too. When the big day arrived, the Grand Symphony Hall was glowing with golden lights. Cars lined the street and crowds waited outside the entrance holding flowers and signs that said welcome back. Clara. Inside the hall, the air was filled with whispers, excitement, and the sound of cameras clicking as famous musicians and old friends took their seats. Ryan stood backstage helping her prepare, fixing the microphone and checking the keyboard. Though the main stage had a grand piano waiting under the spotlight, Clara stepped onto the stage slowly wearing a simple white gown, her silver hair shining under the lights, and the audience stood in silence, the applause waiting at the edge of their hands. She walked to the piano and sat down, taking a deep breath, her fingers touching the keys like greeting an old friend. She whispered softly, "Hello, old soul." The crowd held their breath as she began to play the first song, the same one she had played at the station weeks ago, but this time it sounded even more powerful, more alive. Every note seemed to rise into the air and wrap around every heart in the room. Some people closed their eyes. Others cried quietly, unable to explain the feelings inside them. Her music was not just sound. It was emotion, memory, and forgiveness, all at once. After finishing the song, the hall exploded with applause, but Clara raised her hand for silence and said in a voice clear but trembling, "There is one more song I wish to play tonight, one that was never finished until now." The audience leaned forward, and she began to play the melody Elliot had written, starting slowly, her hands shaking slightly but soon finding their rhythm. The song was soft and sad at first, but then it grew bright and strong like sunlight breaking through clouds, each note carrying love and peace. When she reached the final part, she smiled and whispered, "Goodbye, my love," as her fingers pressed the last key gently. The hall was silent for a full minute before the applause began again, louder than anything she had ever heard. People stood clapping, crying, cheering, calling her name over and over, some throwing flowers onto the stage, others holding their hearts as if afraid they might burst. Clara stood up, bowed deeply, tears shining in her eyes, and whispered to herself, "The music is home again." Ryan ran up to her, smiling wide, saying, "You did it, Clara. You brought him back through your music." She looked at him and smiled gently. "No, child, he was never gone. He was just waiting for me to play his last song," and as the lights dimmed and the audience continued to cheer, the legend of Clara Hartman returned to the world not as a star seeking fame, but as a woman who reminded everyone that true music never dies. It only sleeps, until love wakes it again. The night after the concert, the city could not stop talking about Clara Hartman. Her name was everywhere, on television, on the internet, in newspapers, and on radio stations. People were calling her the miracle pianist who came back from the shadows. Clips of her performance spread across the world, touching hearts in places she had never been. Her music reached children in schools, hospitals, and old homes where people said they felt hope again after years of silence. But while the world celebrated, Clara sat quietly in her room at the Sunset home, her small keyboard beside her bed and a cup of tea cooling on the table. She watched the news on the old television, but her face stayed calm, her eyes thoughtful and far away. Maria entered the room holding a bouquet of roses, smiling proudly. "You did it, Clara. Everyone loves you again. The world is listening." Clara smiled softly and said, "The world forgets quickly, Maria, today. They love you tomorrow. They chase someone new." Maria shook her head. "This is different, Clara. They are offering you a world tour. You can travel again, play in every city. People are waiting." The next morning, Ryan arrived with papers in his hand, his face full of excitement. "Clara, they want you to sign a contract with Harmony Records. They will record your music and make an album. It will be called The Return of the Legend." Clara listened quietly, then said gently, "Ryan, I never played for money or fame. I played because I had something to say through sound. If they want to record that message, I will agree. But I do not want to be turned into a showpiece." Ryan promised her he would protect her from anyone who wanted to use her name for profit. But he was young, and the world of fame was loud and fast. He did not know how easily people could twist good intentions. Within weeks, Clara's schedule filled with interviews, photo shoots, and meetings. People calling her day and night, reporters waiting outside the home to take pictures of her. Every move Maria worried because Clara looked more tired each day, her hands shaking again, her voice softer. But Clara always smiled, saying, "I am fine, I have lived long enough to know peace hides behind the noise." Soon she was invited to perform in London, Paris, and Tokyo. Every concert sold out before tickets even went on. Sale fans cheering before she even touched the keys, calling her name like she was a saint reborn. But fame came with shadows. Greedy managers whispered promises of money. Sponsors demanded more appearances, and reporters began digging into her past, twisting her story to make headlines. Some said she had faked her poverty. Others claimed she had abandoned her family for attention. Clara ignored the lies, but Ryan grew angry, defending her online, arguing with strangers, losing sleep, and hope won. Night after a show in Paris, Clara found him sitting backstage, his eyes red from frustration. She walked over and placed her hand on his shoulder. "Ryan," she said softly, "the truth does not need defenders. Music speaks louder than words, let them talk. And let us keep playing." He nodded slowly, tears in his eyes, "But it is not fair. Clara, they are using your pain for their gain." She smiled sadly. "Pain only hurts when you let it stay inside, when you play it out. It becomes beauty." The next week, Clara traveled to Vienna, the city where she and Elliot had first played together so many years ago. The concert hall was the same. The golden lights, the red curtains, the same grand piano standing on stage like an old friend waiting for her touch, but something felt heavy in her chest as she walked in. The memories too strong, the air too thick. When she sat down to play, her fingers hesitated, her heart trembling as she whispered, "Elliot, are you with me tonight?" The music began soft and gentle, but halfway through her hands froze, her vision blurred, and the crowd gasped, thinking she had forgotten the notes. She smiled faintly, closed her eyes, and began again, slower this time, letting the music carry her soul instead of her hands. By the time she finished, tears rolled down her cheeks, and the audience stood in silence. No applause, no noise, just hearts beating together as if they understood her pain. After the concert, she fainted in the dressing room and woke up in a hospital, Maria beside her holding her hand, Ryan standing at the door with red eyes. "Clara, you pushed too hard," Maria whispered. "Your body cannot handle all this travel, you need rest." Clara looked at them both and said softly, "I will rest after one last performance, one song that belongs to the world." "Not to me," Ryan begged her to stop, but she shook her head, smiling weakly. "Music is not my burden. It is my breath. If I stop, I will not live. I will only exist." Word spread quickly that she would perform one final concert, back in her home city at the same train station where it all began, where she had once played for food and been laughed at by strangers. People around the world promised to come. The city prepared the biggest stage ever built in that station, calling the song of second chances. Clara looked out of the hospital window that night. She could see the lights of the city glowing below like stars waiting for her return. Her voice barely a whisper as she said, "I was found in the noise, but I will say goodbye in silence where it all began." Maria cried softly, and Ryan squeezed her hand, promising he would be there no matter what. And somewhere deep inside, Clara felt peace, knowing the music that saved her once would soon save her again, even if it was for the last time. The night was calm and the city lights shimmered like stars on the ground. The air was cool and filled with a quiet excitement as people gathered at the old train station where everything had begun. It was the same place where Clara once sat with her small keyboard asking if she could play for food, the same place where strangers laughed at her, not knowing who she really was. Now the same place was covered with flowers, banners, and lights, a large stage built where the benches once stood, and thousands of people waiting, their faces full of respect and love. Maria stood near the front, her hands clasped together, her eyes full of tears. Ryan was beside her, holding the small keyboard that Clara used to play when she had nothing. It was the night of the final concert, the one Clara had promised to give. No grand halls, no red carpets, no glittering chandeliers, only the open sky and the echo of passing trains. The crowd fell silent as the clock struck 7, and the lights dimmed, a single spotlight shining on the stage where a grand piano waited, its white surface glowing softly like a pearl in the night. Then from the side of the stage, Clara appeared, walking slowly, her body frail, but her spirit shining bright, her silver hair floating like silk in the breeze. The crowd stood, clapping, cheering, calling her name, but she raised her hand gently, asking for silence. Her smile calm, her eyes warm and full of peace. She walked to the piano and sat down, running her fingers gently over the keys, whispering softly, "It is good to be home." Ryan watched, his heart pounding. He knew she was weak and tired, but he also knew nothing could stop her when the music called. Maria wiped her eyes, whispering to herself, she was born to do this. Clara began to play a soft tune at first, simple and quiet-like. A whisper of wind in the trees, the sound floating through the air, touching every heart in the crowd. It was not one of her old songs and not one from the great masters. It was something new, something pure and full of life, the melody rising and falling like the rhythm of a heartbeat. People closed their eyes and listened, the sound of her music carrying them to a place beyond words, beyond time, where sorrow and beauty danced together. As the song grew stronger, the trains passing by slowed, as if listening too. The drivers turning off their horns, the city itself seeming to pause to honor her final gift. Children in the crowd leaned against their parents and smiled. Old men wiped tears from their eyes. Strangers held hands without knowing why the music had joined them all together. In the middle of the song, Clara stopped for a moment, her hands hovering above the keys, her breath slow. She looked toward the night sky and whispered, "Elliot, this is for you." Then she began to play again, faster now, each note brighter, sharper, more alive than the last, the melody lifting like wings of light, rising higher and higher until it felt like the stars themselves were singing with her. Ryan could not stop crying. He felt as if he was watching a miracle. The crowd stood frozen, afraid to breathe, afraid to break the spell. The final note came soft as a sigh. She held it for a long moment, her fingers trembling, and then let it fade into the air. There was silence, deep and heavy, the kind of silence that only comes after something holy and real. Then applause erupted from every corner of the station, people cheering, crying, shouting her name, throwing flowers toward the stage. Clara smiled, her eyes shining with tears. She tried to stand, but her body was weak. Ryan rushed forward to help her, but she shook her head and whispered, "Let me stay here a little longer. I want to feel the music fade." She placed her hand gently on the piano and said softly, "The music never belonged to me, it belonged to the world. I only borrowed it for a while." Maria reached the stage and hugged her, whispering, "You gave it back beautifully." Clara smiled and said, "Promise me you will keep it alive. Let others play. Let children learn. Let no song die." In silence, Maria nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I promise." The lights dimmed as Clara closed her eyes, her hand still resting on the piano, her breathing soft and steady, a gentle smile on her lips. The crowd continued clapping, not knowing that, at that very moment, the woman who had brought music back to the world was taking her final bow. When the applause finally faded, Ryan stepped to the microphone, his voice breaking as he said, "She came to this station hungry and left the world full. She asked to play for food but gave us something far greater. She gave us back the sound of love." The crowd bowed their heads in silence, some praying, some whispering. "Thank you." The next morning, the news spread across the world. People mourning, but also celebrating her life. Her music played everywhere, on radios, in schools and homes, and in the same station where she had played that night, a bronze piano was placed with a plaque that read, "Clara Hartman, the woman who played for love every year." On that day, musicians young and old gathered there to play the same song she wrote that final night, the song of second chances, the melody that began as a whisper and became a voice for every soul who ever dreamed again. And though Clara was gone, her music remained floating forever in the hearts of those who listened, a soft echo reminding the world that kindness, art, and love never fade. They only wait to be played again.